February 1990. Now you're probably asking yourself, hey Eric, in February of 1990, were you still in Iceland protecting our country from those gosh darn commies? Well, yes, I was. And while I was there, I did some reading. And I want to talk about the books that I read up in Iceland in February of 1990. Excuse me. So let's get started. And then I'll have a little anecdote. Doesn't really relate to Iceland, but it is something that I find interesting. So the first book I read in February of 1990 was Night Chills by Dean R. Koontz. We're going to see a lot of Koontz coming up. So Night Chills takes place in Black River, wherever that is. I don't remember. And some lab releases something that causes people to rape and murder. Something like that. I don't know. It was a long time ago. It was 1990. But I was digging Koontz at the time. Not a fan now, but at the time I was digging this stuff. And I think this one was... I looked at some of the reviews on Amazon when I looked it up to see what it was about, because I didn't remember. And apparently it was pretty brutal. I think someone even said, compared it to Richard Lehman. But I think I probably enjoyed it at the time. Excuse me. Number 2, February of 1990, Phantoms by Dean R. Koontz. And I think all you need to know about this book is Affleck was the bomb in Phantoms. Maybe that's not the only thing you need to know, but I will give 10 points to whoever can tell me where that reference is from. Some Phantoms, I think it's 2 sisters go to this town in Colorado, and there's 150 people dead, 350 people missing. And they're trying to figure out what the hell went on. Now, I really enjoyed this book. And this is where my little anecdote comes in. This book led to me writing an essay, an article, whatever, for a friend's blog decades later. Because in the book, as they're investigating, trying to figure out what the hell went on, and there's all these dead people scattered throughout this town, and it looks as if they were all killed by the same person, which would be impossible because they're scattered all over town. Time of death was at the same time, something like that. It's been a long time, don't remember all the details. But somebody said, basically someone says, well, maybe it was a whole group of people that killed all these people at exactly the same time. Something like that. And someone else says, essentially, no, it couldn't be, because essentially it was obviously done by somebody psychotic, and no 2 people would have the same psychosis, so they would have all been murdered in the same way. Something like that. Essentially, that it couldn't have been more than one person because the evidence pointed to it all being done by the same person. Something to that effect. And I thought to myself, well, what if you had 2 people that somehow thought in the exact same way, had the exact same processes going on in their brain, so that you had murders being committed on opposite sides of the coast, and it looked as if they were committed by the exact same person, but they were being done at the same time. Not like literally to the second the same time, but in a way that there's no way one person could have committed this murder in New York and then an hour later or whatever committed this murder in California. Anyway, so I had that, I just in the middle of reading Phantoms, as soon as I read that line, I had this idea, this thought. And then I read the next book. So I'm going to kind of have to spoil it. But it was essentially that. So I ended up writing for my friend's website an article called Dean Koontz Must Die, in which I accused Dean Koontz of being a time-traveling plagiarist and said that I obviously came up with this idea and wrote a book, and Dean Koontz read it in the future and traveled back into the past before I wrote it and passed it off as his own. And then essentially my article or essay, whatever you would call it, talked about people having the same types of ideas, how there are things in the zeitgeist. I mentioned a few different cases where authors have been accused of stealing ideas because they would publish a book and then someone would say, hey, that's an idea that I had and I posted about it on my blog. You obviously read it. But it's, sometimes people have the same types of ideas. But anyway, so yeah, I thought that was kind of fun because the next book that I read in February of 1990 was Whispers by Dean R. Koontz. And it's about a woman who's terrorized by this guy. He stalks her, he attacks her. He ends up being killed by the cops, I think. And then she continues being terrorized by the same guy. And at first, of course, no one believes her. We killed the guy that did it. So it turns out, all right, so I'm going to spoil this. If you don't want Whispers to be spoiled for you, I don't know, skip ahead a few minutes. But essentially, what happens in this book is that I think this is the one with a hermaphrodite who impregnates himself, and the mother or the family's super religious, and so the pregnant person is sent away, and they keep saying, they're telling everybody in town or whoever will listen that they are adopting a child, one single child, and then they're going to come back with that kid. So they have a kid. But then it turns out that the pregnant person has twins. And they're like, oh, we're screwed. We told everybody they were coming back with a single child. So they raise these twins as if they were a single person. So they have exactly the same thought processes. They think of themselves as a single person. And so when the first one is killed, the second one just takes up where they left off. Something like that. Okay. So spoilers are done, I guess. But anyway, I just thought it was funny that Phantoms gave me an idea. Maybe spoilers aren't done yet, because I'm going to say Phantoms gave me this idea, and the very next book I read essentially had that idea. Anyway, okay, that's me rambling a little bit. So far we've had Night Chills, Phantoms, Whispers, all by Dean Koontz. All pretty good. I remember Phantoms the most. I think I liked it the most of these three. And of course I've seen the movie. So then, number 4, in February 1990, The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. And, I mean, this is a classic. Who doesn't know this story? Scientist comes up with a way to become invisible, and it drives him insane, and he becomes a criminal. And there's murder and robbery and things. This is another book that I'd like to reread. I'd like to pick up like some really nice pulpy looking H.G. Wells books and reread the ones I've already read. There are some that I've never read, so I'd like to read those too, because they're classics, and it's H.G. Wells. If you haven't read The Invisible Man, it's good stuff. The Claude Rains movie, fantastic old movie. The new one with, what's her name? It's on the tip of my brain, and I can't think of it. But anyway, the new one is pretty good. Completely different than the H.G. Wells book, but it's a good movie. Elizabeth Moss. That's it. Next up, book number 5, Midnight by Dean Koontz. And this one, don't remember, so I had to look it up. It takes place in Moonlight Grove, California, and apparently some evil scientist bad guy is experimenting on the people in Moonlight Grove with technology, computers. I don't know. It's making people murder other people. And probably enjoyed it at the time. I liked this. I think this was like Kuntz's really pulpy era. And I enjoyed these. And they had a lot of Dean Koontz books at the PX on base. So that's why I was buying them up and reading them. And there's a few more coming up. So I have another little Dean Koontz related anecdote in a future video. But finally, the last book that I read in 1990, February of 1990, not the whole year, is In Search of Schrodinger's Cat by John Gribben. And this is a book about quantum theory. It's about the history of quantum theory and what it is and how experiments are conducted and what all the theories are and how it affects the world and the universe and everything. And it was a fascinating book. I'm guessing this is the reason I only read, 6 books in February. I would assume this took up most of the month, or the majority of my reading time for the month, because it's not a huge book, but it is a science book. It's not really dry. It's very accessible, but there's a lot of stuff going on in it, a lot of stuff to think about. That is, I'm getting a text from somebody or something. That's what that noise was. And anyway, I'm fascinated by this stuff. Just the whole quantum realm, as it were. And there's a lot of great ideas, just interesting things in this book. Another one that I'd love to read again. I don't have copies of any of these, or I would have shown them to you. But I looked this up, and it's available on Amazon. I actually should check like Half Price Books or something, see if they have it there. But In Search of Schrodinger's Cat, John Gribben, really, really fascinating stuff. I like reading about that kind of science. It interests me. But that's it. That's all I read in February of 1990. Don't really have any anecdotes relating specifically to Iceland. I think I've shared all the fascinating stuff or interesting to me stuff that there was to share. But I do have a few more little tidbits of things that happened while I was there that aren't necessarily Icelandic in nature, but they involve me, and that's all I care about. All right. Okay. Some Dean Koontz, some H.G. Wells, and some science. What more could one ask for? So, if you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put them in the comments below. Let's see. I need a question for this video to engage people. So, let's go with... We'll go with Dean Koontz since he's the majority author here. Are you or have you ever been a fan of Dean Koontz? If so, what's your favorite Dean Koontz book? I'll tell you right now, I was obviously a fan. If you've watched this whole Reading Remembrances series, I've talked about how the first Dean Koontz book I read, I did not like. And I even reread it in January of 1990 and still didn't like it. But the second book I read, which was Watchers, years later, loved it. So that's when I started picking up his stuff and reading it, and I was really digging it. But coming up in the not-too-distant future in my list here, we're going to get to the point where I decided he was getting way too repetitive. I read his 2 or 3 new books. I wasn't even going back and reading the old stuff, but he had a couple books come out in a row that to me felt like the same thing over and over again. And that's when I was like, all right, I'm done with this guy. I've got plenty of other stuff to read. And then it was years and years later, someone recommended one of his books, really said I should read it. So I did, and it did nothing for me. So back in 1990, that time frame, that was the the heyday of Dean Koontz for me. Not a fan anymore. But, I dug some of his old stuff. Not going to go back and reread it. Any of it, I don't think. I have way too much other stuff to read. And while there are books that I love that I'm going to reread, Dean Koontz just doesn't fall into that category. But what do you think? What are your Dean Koontz thoughts? So there we go. Let's discuss. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you'd care to follow me on other social media, my Twitter is @Ronin5757. My Instagram, where I post pictures of excuse me. Instagram, where I post pictures of books, comics, board games, fuzzy animals, is Eric Smith 5757. That's Eric with a K, ERIKSMITH 5757. And that's all I've got. So until next time, read more books.